Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of a brand new program called The Deep. Now let me introduce you to what The Deep is all about. Now, history is written not only by the victorious but should be also written as a narrative by the vanquished. But generally when we look at history and how we know it, it's always the victorious who comes out with their narrative. Now it takes two hands to clap. It definitely takes a small spark to start a fire. But we need to go deep down inside and try to figure out what the truth really is when we look at history and also to some of the events that has really shaped our lives today. Apart from just COVID being a virus that's affecting us, a pandemic is here to stay. A new normal has come to play. We'll talk about the COVID-19 virus as the programs continue. But here we're talking about one event and one event only, the 9/11 attacks. It's been 2 decades, exactly 20 years since 9/11 happened in September 11th, 2001. We're in 2021. But in 20 years, a lot of questions have been come and asked because the truth doesn't seem to simplify or give us an advantage to understand what really happened on that fateful day. We'll talk about the 9/11 attacks in these coming programs on The Deep. But understand this, we need to go down the rabbit hole to figure out what really is a conspiracy theory, and we need to debunk it. The truth is what you get here in this program called The Deep. Welcome to The Deep, only on Rosebowl. This is a fantastic episode that gives you the truth in a way that hopefully is unbiased. Now, there's always a reason to go to war, and that is what history has shown us. Earlier, it was about conquest, kingdoms fighting kingdoms for loot and plunder and to become more wealthy, to gain more territory, and that's about it. But the dynamics of war has changed so much. Earlier, it was about oil. Now it's about the ability to sell arms to get more money, and now it's about banks giving you debts because those who consolidate not only the debts and control it make the money. We'll try to understand what this really means. But to go to war, you need a reason. Now, if you don't have a reason to go to war, apparently countries around the world now are starting to do what we know as false flag operations. There is a lot of truth behind it. We will decimate the truth slowly and try to figure out as to what really is happening when you're talking about false flag operations. Now, false flag operation is one where a country comes up with a narrative that someone attacked their country and so the reason to go to war is here, a clear and present danger that has to be thwarted. Let's get into false flag operations. Now, history always gives us a narrative where we can now sit down with the amount of data that we have out there and try to figure out what really happened. How did certain people come to power? How did they really write a chapter on history which cannot be forgotten? Because that is basically what has happened in the past, but also had a profound effect on the future and where we stand today. Let's take a look as to how Hitler came to power. Now, way back in 1933, February 27th, the Reichstag, which is basically the German parliament, was on fire. Nobody knew how this happened. Apparently, it was this one event that gave Adolf Hitler the impetus to come to power. Now, what is the narrative here? Van der Lubbe, a Dutch communist, was found behind the Reichstag, half naked, and was arrested. The narrative goes that it was this one 25-year-old man who actually burnt down the Reichstag. Is that the truth or not? We will never know. What we do know is that 3 days later, he was on trial and hanged 3 days before his 25th birthday. Was it him or somebody else who burnt the Reichstag, and for what? Now just look at this narrative. It sounds almost impractical. How can a 25-year-old man who is or was a Dutch communist go with his shirt and just light a fire in the Reichstag and burn down the whole building? It's a huge parliament building. But historians are at loggerheads. They claim that the Nazi party and their Gestapo, the secret police, went into the Reichstag through an underground tunnel, soaked the whole building with petroleum and chemicals, and eventually lit the fire. Not really. They apparently sent Van der Lubbe to that building, made him take out his shirt, soaked it in gasoline again, and then made sure that he lit the fire. Now, that night, Adolf Hitler with Hermann Göring would stand in front of the building which was completely burned down and then give a decree that all communists would be taken and shot dead and anybody against the Nazi party would be hanged as well. This was the impetus that gave Adolf Hitler the chance to go in and rise to power. in fact to take what is his, not rightfully, but by force. Now, one way for a dictator to come to power is to make sure that you suspend all civil liberties and the publication that give the news out is controlled by you. That's exactly what Adolf Hitler did the day after the Reichstag building burned down. He made sure that publications that were to his cause were operational. Publications against his cause were completely closed down. He suspended all civil liberties. And what he did was he came out with the Reichstag fire decree that stated that he needed complete control and power to make sure that all enemies are eliminated and a clear and present danger is thwarted. Now, what meant is that he now had the Nazi party coming together and he wanted one thing, a war. How did he get that? Basically, after suspending all civil liberties, making sure the publications that were true to him came out with stories that the Reichstag was burnt by the communists. Now he had a reason to go to war. He did not need carte blanche and money to really take power and go to fight a war. The war was his, and he decided he was going to invade the nearest country that he possibly could, and the one that he wanted back. Because remember, he was a soldier in World War I, and when Germany lost, he was completely idealized into the fact that he wanted now a German Reich, a nation that could go to war and become the biggest country on the planet and also a superpower. And so he went and invaded Poland. Now, historians are at loggerhead to figure out as to what the real narrative is, what the truth was behind the Reichstag being burnt down. Now, it is common sense for you and me to think that how is it possible that a 25-year-old, half-blind Dutch national who apparently is a communist took his shirt and burned down the whole building? It just does not seem truthful at all. But what really seems truthful is the fact that Adolf Hitler and the Nazi party and Goering had something to do with the plan of burning it down. Actually, all civil liberties were, of course, suspended. Publications were stopped from going and saying what the real truth is. And of course, he got his war. But that is definitely under the category of a false flag operation because Adolf Hitler came to power. September 1941, ground is broken in Arlington, USA, and the Pentagon's construction begins. But on December 7, 1941, what happens? Well, the Japanese Imperial Forces comes and bombs the US naval fleet at Hawaii. 2,000 odd dead, 1,700 odd injured, and Roosevelt, the then president, apparently went and told the public that he had no idea this was going to happen and that negotiations were on with the Japanese to come to peace. But as the narrative goes on, we would know now from data that we glean that Roosevelt actually knew that an attack was imminent. And he was forewarned by his advisors, and he also got proof that the attack was going to happen. Why did Roosevelt keep quiet about it? Maybe he wanted an attack to happen so that he got carte blanche to go to war. So December 7, 1941, when the Imperial Japanese forces go and attack the US fleet in Hawaii, Pearl Harbor, this time Roosevelt goes and says that this is a dastardly attack. It is war. He wants to go to war with Japan, and so he goes to the legislators and to Congress and says he needs carte blanche to go to war. He gets his war, and World War II, as you know it, happens. Now, we know that the Manhattan Project started sometime around July 1945. The idea was to make sure that America and its technology prowess increases and becomes better. How does this happen? Well, in May 7, 1945, we know that World War II ended with the Germans coming out and saying that they are completely devastated and that they now agree to the terms that the US put forth for them to withdraw from the war. They were defeated, of course. Exactly 1 month later, an operation called Operation Paperclip was launched. What is Paperclip? Well, 100 of the top-notch scientists who were there in Germany were taken to the Americas and also taken into this whole Manhattan Project to make sure that advanced military technology was the way forward for America. That culminated with the Trinity test. The first atom bomb was exploded. December 7, 1941 was the day that Roosevelt decided that he needs to go to war because the Japanese imperial forces had attacked the US on their soil in Hawaii. So he asked for carte blanche, he got it, went to war, and World War II, as we know, the US and Germans were now at loggerheads with each other. But what happened eventually was that on May 8, 1945, the war with Germany ended. And so a month later, about 100 of the greatest minds behind the Nazi technology regime were taken from Germany and integrated with the Americans, and Operation Paperclip was born. The Manhattan Project came into play on July 16, 1945. The idea was to help America develop the technology prowess when it came to war. And it culminated in the Trinity test happening, and what that meant was the atomic bomb was born. Now just think about this. Operation Paperclip, you take the 100 top Nazi scientists, your enemies, take them to your country, give them complete freedom to go and help your technology being developed. It's unheard of, but it was done. It's the truth. So the Manhattan Project was born. The only idea was to make sure that America's nuclear capabilities were in place. But it wasn't a solo effort. You had UK and the Canada, the United Kingdom and the Canada coming together in helping make sure that the Manhattan Project was a success. Of course, Trinity paved the way of atomic bombs being born. 19 kilotons of TNT was the equivalent of what exploded that day. And radioactive glass, it left a crater about 10 feet deep and about 1,000 feet wide. It was chaos. People couldn't believe it. In fact, Oppenheimer would say that the scientists who were responsible for having this bomb detonate were in tears. They couldn't believe what happened. That day, they all came to the culmination, and the idea was in their heads that what they have created was something that even Satan would be proud of. The truth is, eventually, two cities would bear the brunt of this: Nagasaki and Hiroshima. 19 kilotons of TNT was the equivalent of what the explosion in New Mexico was about. The Trinity test was there. But a variation of that bomb was what was unleashed on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The bomb that hit Hiroshima, the devastation was just unbelievable. The epicenter was completely obliterated. 70,000 people died instantly, and over the years, 100,000 more would perish because of radiation poisoning. 1 square mile was completely obliterated, and fires went right across 5 miles wide. The devastation was unbelievable. The world was not prepared for what would happen because they knew that a bomb is a bomb that essentially just wipes out an area. But going years into the future, radiation poisoning and the fallout would be more damaging. But that was only Hiroshima. They should have stopped with it. Japan didn't give up the war, even though they were reeling under what had happened. Nagasaki, the second bomb went off. 40,000 people died, 30,000 injured. 1 square mile was just completely battered with fires going everywhere. The Manhattan Project at that point of time was the biggest undertaking anywhere in the world, and the United States did it with about 130,000 people working for the project, the biggest undertaking ever. Now, the man responsible for making sure that this project happened was General Leslie Groves. He was part of the Army Corps, and he was the one who made sure this project was completely secret. So secret that even the Vice President did not know about it till the time Roosevelt died. But can you imagine the secrecy that goes behind implementing a project like this? This is the case that even goes today to see that everything that has to be compartmentalized means that something secret is happening that the world need to know, and even the people working the project will not know what they are doing. Now, in the Manhattan Project, 3 different facilities were used. One is the research and design at Los Alamos, the uranium enriching project that was done at Oak Ridge, and the plutonium enrichment project that was being done in Washington State. 130,000 people were involved with the project, but it was so well done, this whole idea of compartmentalization, which was a brainchild of General Leslie Groves, that it worked. Secrecy was maintained. So much so, like I said before, till the event of Roosevelt's death, even Vice President Harry Truman had no idea that the project existed. Now, 100,000 people were just, and community were just taken and overnight offloaded. That area was used to do one thing, the Manhattan Project. Now, secrecy can be maintained, but the whole idea is that secretive knowledge and knowledge itself, if it is compartmentalized, then the secret remains a secret. And that's exactly what General Leslie Groves did. Even today, the Manhattan Project is so secretive that very little is known about it, and even today it is classified. Now, the reason to go to war, was it a false flag attempt? We don't really know, but the attack was imminent, and it did happen on the day that Roosevelt went on to say that he needed carte blanche to go to war. And this was the attack on Pearl Harbor. The Germans, in fact, Adolf Hitler wanted to come to power. The only way he could do that was to create a false flag narrative. The Reichstag was burned down. Are there any more narratives that lead to war in the future? Of course there are. Were they false flag? That's what we need to answer on The Deep. On August 10, 1964, the Tonkin Gulf Resolution was signed by President Lyndon Baines Johnson that gave him carte blanche and the impetus to go into war against North Vietnam and allowed his troops to get into North Vietnam. But that did not happen till August 4th, 1964, when American ships, 2 of them, went on to claim that they were under attack by North Vietnamese military and that they were being attacked and unprovoked. Lyndon Baines Johnson, the president at that time, went to the legislators and to Congress and said that this attack meant that war was imminent and he needed carte blanche to get into the war and make sure that America's and defenses were now being taken care of. Was this a false flag attack? Well, in 2005, documents were declassified, went on to say, or state rather, that the attacks never happened. So this definitely was a false flag attack. Why is nobody talking about it? Because false flag attacks have been happening right from the time ideas were put into play that a resolution has to come into play to make sure that war was imminent and that the psyche of the people were galvanized to understand that war was necessary to thwart a clear and present danger. Now, right through this episode, we have been focusing on one thing: false flag events, even though we started saying that we're going to be looking at 9/11 and what really happened on that fateful day. But to get here, we need to understand that history and narrative has had false flag events always happening and gives an impetus to go to war. So presidents right across have been taking the idea, or right across the world, dictators have also have been using false flag events not only to come to power, but eventually to galvanize forces to go to war, whatever be their agenda. So we saw Adolf Hitler coming to power when the Reichstag building, the parliament in Germany, was burned down. He blamed the communists for it, came to power, got his war. We also know that in World War II, for a fact, there was a bombing that took place in Hawaii by the imperial forces of Japan on US, and eventually war did happen. But it only happened when Roosevelt declared that December 7, 1941 was a day that the Dastardly Act took place and they had to go to war. He got carte blanche. World War II did come into play when America declared war on the Japanese. We eventually saw as to how the Manhattan Project came to be, how it is just completely bizarre that 100 of the top-notch scientists from the defeated Germany, Nazi scientists who were against the Americans, were taken by the Americans in Operation Paperclip, and they were used to make sure that the Manhattan Project and the nuclear capability of America was strengthened. Eventually, the bombs were used on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And then we know that eventually it was President Lyndon Baines Johnson who went to war when he got carte blanche, when he claimed, or rather 2 American warships claimed they were under attack by forces that were North Vietnamese. That gave him carte blanche. The legislators and the Congress told him, let's go to war, because they understand that this is a clear and present danger. And now, in the episodes to come, we try to understand if 9/11 also was a false flag attack, only here on The Deep.